We Europeans can't believe that such behavior is currently happening. To illustrate the facts of events occurring in Japan, we have a certain number of experts and speakers today here with us, and I would like to right away dive into the presentation of the first speaker, Mr. Koide, Dr. Koide. He's a Japanese national, a medical doctor, and he has been a victim of kidnapping and also so-called deprogramming. You can call that maybe forced deconversion of his belief or forced recounting his belief. And this has happened based on non-state actors, but with a blessing and turning a blind eye of state and local authorities. Dr. Koide, you have the floor.
My name is Hiroshita Koide. Now I'm working as medical doctor in Tokyo. I'm a believer of the Unification Church Family Federation. First of all, I would like everyone to know that the act of abduction and confinement of members of the Family Federation was supported not only by people who are money-oriented or anti-religion, but also by mainstream Christian pastors. When children join a new religion, many parents may find it difficult to understand their children's words and actions. Worried parents visited Christian churches seeking advice on how to deal with their children. The pastors of the Christian churches were generally simple and honest, and the atmosphere in the church was peaceful. But the pastors who engaged in forceful rescue of believers had become extremely radical under the influence of left-wing activists. So the church became such a place where the terrible act of abduction and confinement was recommended. Without the loving atmosphere of the Christian churches, worried parents would not have been so easily convinced to resort to abduction and confinement for their own children. Two major groups of Christians, the United Church of Christ in Japan and Japan Alliance Christ Church, provided strong foundation for anti-family federation groups. Now, I'm going to tell you about my own experience of abduction and confinement. I developed my faith in the Family Federation when I was a medical student. In 1990, I began working as a physician at the hospital in Tokyo. The hospital was created by a female doctor who was a member of the Family Federation, and many doctors who were believers gathered at the hospital. I was very satisfied to work there. However, at that time, a lot of negative information against the Family Federation had been spread throughout Japan by the mass media. My parents got a lot of this information from my friends and teachers of my medical school, and some of them introduced my parents to an anti-family federation group. The leader was Mr. Takashi Miyamura, professional deprogrammer. The group's meetings were held at the Shinjuku West Church. At those meetings, they were taught how to prepare for the confinement, how to ask relatives for cooperation, and even how to get in shape mentally during a confinement. Especially my mother was influenced by them, so she decided to lock me up and let me give up my faith. Due to her influence, my father, brother, sister, and many joined in the plan to confine me. On June 13, 1992, when I went to my parents' house, I was surrounded by about 15 relatives. I was thrown into a car and carried to the apartment. In front of the building, about 10 former believers were waiting. The windows in the room were fitted with metal bars, so they couldn't be opened. The view outside was also blocked. The entrance door was locked with a chain, and the man was sitting there 24 hours a day. And the room felt like it was on the 5th floor or higher. About 7 relatives stayed there with me. I was concerned about the negative effect on my patients' physical and mental health. For several days, I pleaded with everyone to let me contact the hospital. Parents and relatives gave me permission to record information about my patients and send it to the hospital. However, Mr. Miyamura, the real leader of this action, rejected it. Then my family demanded that I explain the teachings and the activities of the Family Federation, and continued to cry out for them to stop the violent religious persecution that disregarded basic human rights. To my surprise, Mr. Hiroshi Hirata, a lawyer close to Mr. Miyamura, came to the room. The lawyer assured everyone that the situation was not illegal. My relatives accepted the lawyer's words. I was forced to read the New and Old Testament and a book that teaches the doctrine of the Family Federation. And at night, former believers and Mr. Miyamura came to the room to persuade me. Mr. Miyamura thought violence was necessary to change believers' mind. So I was beaten up quite a bit by both my father and my brother. A bruise around my eye by my father's knee kick wouldn't go away for over a week. My colleagues at the hospital located the place where I was confined. The president of the hospital requested Habscorp's claim for release from illegal confinement from the Tokyo High Court. An order was issued for my parents to appear before the High Court. The notice was sent to the apartment. Mr. Miyamura ignored the notice and instructed my relatives to move the place. We all were moved to Niigata City in the midnight. It is more than 250 kilometers from Tokyo. As soon as we arrived, Mr. Matsunaga, pastor of Nice Evangelical Christian Church, visited us. He was in a cooperative relationship with Mr. Miyamura, and they did the same methods: lock believers up, use biblical language, confuse them, and make them give up their faith. However, their beliefs were quite different. Mr. Miyamura had not Christian faith. Pastor Matsunaga was a so-called Calvinist. The confinement and persuasion continued for over 10 months. During that time, my parents could hardly ever leave that room. Furthermore, my father kept calling Mr. Miyamura almost every night to report our situation. My father would be cursed as, "Because of your bad attitude, your son can't abandon that strange religion." One night, my father said to me, "If I let you go and the activities of Anti-Family Federation become public, they could not continue activities anymore. I can't let you out alive. I will kill you. And then I will die too." Shouting that, he grabbed me by the neck and pushed me down. I realized that he was mentally exhausted. I had no choice but to lie and say that I had renounced my faith. He had been trained in the Japanese army when he was young, and he had said, "Through that training, I am prepared to die for the purpose." For fear of being killed by father, I was forced to act as an anti-family federation. The beginning of further mental suffering. The pain lasted for 1 year. I was moved to a mountain villa by Mr. Miyamura's order. There I was interviewed by a journalist, Yoshifu Arita, and a reporter from the popular weekly magazine named Bunshun. The contents were used to criticizing the Family Federation. Mr. Arita is currently a member of the Japanese Diet. Then I was forced to appear on a TV program called the Special Report made by TBS Tokyo Broadcasting System. I was taken out from the room to the biggest riverbank in Niigata and filmed by a TV camera. My father and several former believers surrounded me. When filming, it seemed that Mr. Miyamura, the programmer, was the leading person there. When my comments didn't match his thoughts, he immediately interrupted me. He then said that the Family Federation was a group of crazy people who lacked human love. The parts of my remarks were used by the anti-Family Federation media. After exposing myself to such an extent, I was allowed to leave my apartment and walk to Matsunaga's church under my father's watching. There were about 10 people attending the church who were in the same position as me, forced to give up their faith. Only 1 month after attending the church, accompanied by my parents, I was brought together with Mr. Miyamura to 2 lawyers, Mr. Yamaguchi and Mr. Kito. They had been making many violent criticisms of the Family Federation on TV. I had to speak by the instructions of my father and Mr. Miyamura. The lawyers knew I was not free. Lawyer Kito said, "I think it's time to let you go, don't you? But I'll have to let Mr. Miyamura make that decision." I couldn't tell them on my basic human rights. I was forced to sign a legal contract to sue the Family Federation and the hospital. I was not the only one in such case. At Matsunaga's church, believers who had just been released from confinement were encouraged to meet with such lawyers. I had learned that there was a group of lawyers who used people to achieve their own political purpose. These former believers had been damaged by being confined by their own parents, and they still felt the fear of being locked up again. For that reason, they had no choice but to file a lawsuit with their lawyer's advice. And as soon as I filed the lawsuit, I was forced to engage in even more traumatic behavior. I was forced to go to the apartment where believers were confined, and I had to talk with them. I still regret my visit to the rooms of innocent believers. They were definitely in the suffering. Matsunaga's church held consultations and seminars for parents of believers every weekend. The pastor and the former believers convinced them that the only way to help the members was to confine them. They also explained the specific steps they should take to lock them in. They also emphasized that only parents and siblings could do it. In doing this, by recommending confinement, I had become a core member of the group. I felt that I was like the living dead. By the way, I started to work in a hospital near the church as an assistant physician. I got the pleasure of being able to help others. 2 months of work at the hospital, I got some money in my own bank account. I was able to get out of the group and I ran away to Tokyo. I knew that my parents would be shocked. For the next 2 years, I could not tell my parents where I was. I thought that they were still interacting with Mr. Myanmar's group and might have imprisoned me again. In fact, following Myanmar's advice, my father borrowed $20,000 to Matsunaga's church for new building constructions. After I wrote about this 2 years experience in a book which made anti-family federation activities public, I could safely communicate with my parents and siblings. My mother got Alzheimer's disease. She forgot all her resentments toward the family federation. I finally began to feel her original warm love to me. My father said he had spent $200,000 in the kidnapping for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koide. What a suffering. Really incredible. At this point, I would like to introduce our lawyer from the Paris bar, Ms. Patricia Duval, to comment on the issue of deprogramming, coercive deconversion, abduction, and kidnapping of thousands of unificationists, thousands in Japan.
So after this appalling testimony and very revealing, I will just make a few comments to explain the situation. First, the power of family in Japan. I mean, all the kidnapped and confined so-called deprogrammed members were adults. And still, even if they were 50 years old, or I don't know what age, they had to follow, well, in the tradition, to follow their parents' advice and choices for them. So it's just a factor that I wanted to mention to explain the situation and how deprogramming was kind of raging in Japan in the 80s and 90s mostly, even if it's now the tradition is and the family authority is kind of a bit less strong with the young people now. In the 80s and 90s, it was really very, very strict. And mostly his father had been trained in the military, and he was influenced also by that. But I wanted to stress the power of family because this is one thing I was wondering in my report to the UN is there a freedom of religion or belief for adult overage in Japan? I mean, if there is no choice, if they have no choice as regards their religions, it's a big problem. And Japan is committed to protect freedom of religion or belief by signing the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So it should follow and respect its commitments. And so this is one big point that has to be changed and evolve in Japan. But anyway, this situation did not happen by chance. I mean, there was a group of lawyers, like he mentioned, and a group of pastors, and they had kind of converging interests. Like this group of lawyers was close to the Communist Party, and they were fighting Unification Church because Unification Church was opposing the expansion of communism in Asia after Second World War, and therefore threatening spirituality in the area, because communism was the atheistic view and eliminating religions. So the Unification Church and its founder, Reverend Moon, started to oppose communism and started to have enemies in this regard. So the group of lawyers, who were politically motivated, started to attack the church and openly state they were going for the destruction of Unification Church. And they are the same who are still operating today and pushing for dissolution of the religious corporation, which they obtained in first instance at the district court. And now the decision is appealed at the High Court, but they are still the same lawyers, and they are still with their agenda to this day. But I think it's an important point to know that at some point, the pastors who had also started the deprogramming on their own, because they saw the Unification Church as a competing religion. So the pastors and the lawyers started to announce a common agenda and the practice of they called it rescue of believers. It was actually deprogramming. They didn't say openly it was confinement and abduction, but this is what it was, and coerced persuasion to leave the faith. So the parents who were had been made anxious about their children's choices to join the Unification Church started to look around for solutions, and they turned to the pastors because they were proposing their help, so-called help, which was actually coercive rescue. And so they started to, and the lawyers pushed, recommended the deprogrammers to the parents. They recommended to the parents to use the rescue services of the pastors. So this is how it became a nationwide activity. It was a nationwide activity. This is per the testimony of the deprogramming pastors themselves in court. They admitted it. It was a nationwide activity to deprogram the believers of the Unification Church, and this is how we come now to the figure of 4,300 believers who've been subjected to that very violent practice, successfully or unsuccessfully. Fortunately, most of it was unsuccessful because they only have 32 civil court cases they are relying on to ask dissolution of the church. 32 court cases over 40 years and 4,300 deprogrammed members. So you see the result is very few. But anyhow, they relied on these very old cases to now ask for a dissolution of the church, using the same campaigns, media campaigns, saying the church is made lots of victims and so on. But where are the victims? The victims are victims of deprogramming because, and this is my last point, what I want to stress in his testimony is that in order, at some point he realized he could not escape from confinement. So, because he had a whole family, there was a team of 12 people watching him night and day. The deprogrammers asked the parents to quit their jobs, and they spent a fortune for not having a job anymore and paying the deprogrammer. But they were there until the end. So their purpose, his father said, even if I have to kill you, I will kill you, meaning they were going to the end. This is what the deprogrammers asked the parents to do. So anyway, they were pushing the parents to do full confinement and so on. So he understood he could not escape. So what happened is he feigned, he pretended to have lost his faith. And then he was put, because the deprogrammers were really looking for those who were pretending. So he was put through a rehabilitation period where he had to prove that he actually had lost his faith. And this is how he was asked to do criticism in the media. He had media interviews where he was coached by the deprogrammer, and he had to be really strong against the church. So he had to do media. He had to visit other confined members to give them a lot of criticism against the church. And then finally, he was taken to the lawyers to file a financial claim against the church. He had to do all that to prove his apostasy from the church. So I think this is something that we have, we don't really understand here in the West, because we think, okay, they have decided to not believe in the church anymore, and well, they could just change their mind, and that's it. But it's not the point. The point is, years later, even 20 years later, they were thinking they could be abducted and confined again. So they still had the pressure. The only thing that happened to him and freed him and his speech and his freedom of choice is that he wrote a book, and he published the book before coming open again. So he was protected. He could not be confined again. And this is how now he's testifying. But the thing is that all the cases that were built against the church and serve as a dissolution basis, all the cases have been fabricated. They have been filed by people under coercion who had no resentment against the church and who did not consider themselves as victims. They considered themselves as having a serious problem with family that they wanted to solve, and this is the way they did it. And so I really wanted to make this point clear, because this is what I think is really striking in your testimony.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duval. I think it's a very important point. What has to be maybe added to not to create confusion, Unification Church and Family Federation is the same organization. Family Federation is the new name, the recent name. Unification Church, you mentioned Unification Church, and you mentioned Family Federation, so to explain that. Also, one additional point to be said is it is state, the state is turning a blind eye on these kidnappings, or has been a long time. And it has been, international organizations have been reminding the Japanese authorities that they cannot just ignore this. So our next speaker, which will give us a very important presentation, will be Mr. Kondo. He is actually the head of the legal department of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, or the Unification Church. Unification, donc, Mr. Kondo, you have the floor, please.
Okay. Thank you for coming. The title of my presentation is Problems of the Tokyo District Court Decision on the Dissolution of Family Federation. As he explained, our official name is Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, but I believe that you are familiar with our former name, Unification Church. So in my presentation, I use the abbreviation UC to indicate our church. After the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated on July 8th of 2022, the Lawyers Network Against UC created the false impression that serious and widespread harm caused by the UC was occurring across the country. It is because the suspect quoted his motive of the murder, the grudge against Unification Church. However, later we have found that the major lawyer of the network stated in the July 2022 issue of a periodical the number of consultations related to the UC has declined. It was the same month as the Abe incident, and therefore the claims by the network appear to be merely propaganda. However, in those days, the media pressured the government. As a result, a necessary new law to control donation was enacted, and the government even changed the legal interpretation for dissolving the UC. And finally, it filed a lawsuit seeking a dissolution of the UC. The government tries to dissolve the UC based on Religious Corporate Act, Article 81, Paragraph 3, Item 1. The requirements are violation of law and harming public welfare seriously and clearly. Prime Minister Kishida changed the legal interpretation and included civil torts in the concept of violation of law to dissolve the UC over one night. However, civil torts are too vague for the grounds for dissolution, and such interpretation violates ICCPR Article 18, Paragraph 3. As for public welfare, the Human Rights Committee recommended Japan for 3 times not to restrict religious freedom by public welfare. The government ignored them. Surprisingly enough, the court accepted the change of legal interpretation and ignored the recommendation by the committee too. However, recently, there were only a few tort cases related to the UC. As a result, the government submitted fabricated written statements under the names of alleged victims. Yet the UC exposed the fabrications in the court. Finally, the court found grounds for dissolution based on speculations, saying there must be unknown cases of victims, and it issued a decision to dissolve the UC. Regarding civil cases, the UC instructed its members not to accept large amount of donations in 2009, and the number of the cases declined. The Tokyo District Court found tortious acts based on not only civil judgments, but also settlements. Even so, the total amount declined to 5% after 2009. For dissolving a religious corporation, there must be a presently existing motive. So the court found torts based on speculations, violating the principle of judgment based on evidence. Regarding the past torts cases, majority of the plaintiffs were victims of deprogramming. Courts relied only on deprogrammed apostates for facts dating from 20 to 40 years before. The courts found illegality based on social norms, violating international law. In this graph, the blue line shows the number of believers who suffered deprogramming, and the orange line shows the believers who sued the UC. These two lines show similarity. It means that even the past cases were intentionally created cases. From every perspective, the decision to dissolve the UC can be deemed unjust. We sincerely request the international community's attention and monitoring regarding this issue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kondo. We go right away to our next speaker. Will be Dr. Massimo Introvigne, head and founder of CESNUR, a think tank for new religious movements in the world, and he is a well-known religious scholar who will to talk more about his in-depth knowledge of the whole case.
So, as you have heard, on March 25, the District Court of Tokyo ordered the dissolution of Unification Church, and the case is under appeal. You may have heard, however, in the international media a lie that being dissolved only means you lose your tax-exempt status. This is false. If you are dissolved in Japan, all the assets are transferred to a liquidator, bank account, places of worship. So the believers could still believe in their heart, but they cannot meet in any place, they cannot own property, they cannot function. So it's a homicide. And even some scholars have coined the word religicide for this case. So we don't have much time left, so I will try to answer 4 questions about the religicide: why, when, who, and how was this, or is this crime being perpetrated. Why? There are many colleagues who have studied the general hostility of Japan to religion. Japan is a very secular society, but it also has a long tradition of scapegoating foreign religions for all the problems of the country. It was once Christianity during the interwar period, but up until now that's going on, it was the Jehovah's Witnesses, which are of course an American religion, and now it's the Unification Church, which is Korean, and there is a lot of anti-Korean racism going on as a subtext of this story. When in 2022, Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister, was assassinated by a man whose mother is a member of Unification Church. The assassin, Yamagami, was never a member, but he claimed he had killed Shinzo Abe to punish him of his sympathy for the Unification Church, because 20 years before, in 2002, his mother went bankrupt, he said, because of excessive donations to the church. Never mind he waited for 20 years, never mind members of the church gave back to the family half of the donations when the relatives started complaining. But that was a golden opportunity, which leads me to the third question: who promoted this? This was promoted not by politics. Politics initially tried to resist it, the government, but by the media. And the media were agitated for more than 20 years by an anti-unification church and anti-cult association called the National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales. And we know this association, as hinted before, was founded by members of the socialist and communist parties to eliminate the Unification Church as an anti-communist organization, but then to fight conservative religion in general, and that's why they also go against the Jehovah's Witnesses, but also against evangelical, conservative Christianity, and many other groups. And this national network was founded in 1987, and they tried for many years unsuccessfully to have the Unification Church dissolved, until the assassination of Shinzo Abe offered a golden opportunity. But the opportunity was caught because the campaign existed before, and it had existed for more than 30 years, actually, when Abe was assassinated. And finally, how they did it. And they did it by, and that's the long and the short of the court decision, by accusing the Unification Church of what they called spiritual sales. Spiritual sales is a word invented by this anti-Unification Church Association for sales of small pagodas and seals and other artifacts believed to bring good luck that some believers back in the 1980s and early 90s of the Unification Church were selling for high prices. And then they extended the word spiritual sales to donations. Now question, did these sales of artifact for prices higher than their value happen? Yes. It happened decades ago, and that was not an activity of the Unification Church as a church. Well, Unification Church is a Christian religion. They don't deal in Buddhist charms or pagodas. It was an individual activity of some believers, and these believers were stopped eventually by the Unification Church, and after the Unification Church stopped them, the number of complaints for the so-called spiritual sales decreased to almost zero. That's not my opinion, that's not the scholar's opinion, that's written in the decision of the dissolution case, that in the last 9 or 10 years, there have been almost no cases, 3 or 4. So why was the dissolution pronounced? Because these lawyers persuaded the government and the court that even if there are no cases of spiritual sales, there can be, perhaps, hypothetically, because the church being a bad organization, it's true they stopped, but perhaps tomorrow they will start again, and it seems they stopped, but perhaps they didn't, and things are going on under the table, etc. But that's all speculation. Their own data, the data of the government, the data of the court in the dissolution case, say in recent years there have been no cases of these spiritual sales. That's extremely important because the reason the court is dissolved is because of the spiritual sales. In the media there have been campaigns like they give a bad education to children. No, but that's not part of the court case and of the dissolution decision. It's only about the donations and the spiritual sales, which did not happen in recent years. So, summing up, within a climate of general hostility to religion, particularly to foreign religion, organization founded by more than 30 years ago by communist and socialist lawyers to destroy conservative religion, and in particular the anti-communist Unification Church, took the opportunity of the assassination of Shinzo Abe to revamp its campaign and used as the final weapon the spiritual sales. The name was invented by them, but referring to something which some members of the Unification Church did decades ago and which had stopped. But it was said, perhaps it didn't stop, perhaps it goes on secretly, but there is no evidence for this. So we have a legally sanctioned religicide or killing of a religion which is not supported by evidence, it's motivated by politics and takes advantage of a climate hostile to conservative religion in general, in a deeply secular society, and a society with a considerable degree of xenophobia, where many are happy to bash a church whose headquarters are in Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Introvigne. I think a very great insight. So to wrap up the meeting, we have again our lawyer, Patricia Duval, who will speak about another aspect of this whole case, which is very important. Patricia.
Thank you. Yes, very rapidly, I will speak about education at school, but very rapidly, one last point is the dissolution is based on a so-called a violation of public welfare. This is an exception to civil liberties that Japan has kept in its constitution and laws, which is unacceptable under human rights standards, meaning that the church has been accused, has not violated laws. They are being accused of having had civil litigation with some people, and based on that, they are accused of having disturbed the peace of families in Japan, the peaceful life of families, therefore having violated, infringed, harmed public welfare. So this is a very important point that Mr. Kondo raised, because the UN Human Rights Committee has advised Japan for 30 years to stop using public welfare as an excuse to violate civil liberties. And the other point is also violation of social norms. They have been accused of violating social norms in matters of religion. So this is an unwritten, very vague standard that the courts have been using to sentence some torts against the church, which the government is relying on to bring about dissolution. That was my last comment about the legal side of the dissolution case. And there's just another aspect I'm just mentioning very quickly, is that it's not only the dissolution of the religious corporation they are going for, but they are going after, but also deprogramming or re-education of children at schools in the Japanese public school system. The children have so-called human rights classes and awareness classes where they are taught a lot of bad things about the Unification Church in order to re-educate them against their parents' beliefs. Then they have all these classes and then they have counselors ready when a child is asking for information or being anxious about his parents' beliefs. Then they have counselors who are trained by apostates, by former members. They have those counselors who advise the child and give advice to the children. Then they have distributed millions of copies of SOS mini letters. It's kind of a mini letter that they distribute to the children if they want more information and they ask for help. Then they can go online and have a special counselor. And in bad situations, they are referred to those lawyers who can ask for new guardians to be appointed instead of their parents to pursue their education. And they are offered shelter homes away from their parents' house. So it's a very serious issue, and a very serious issue concerning human rights, because Japan, it's my last sentence, Japan has a twisted interpretation of the rights of the child and human rights. They say the child might not have chosen religious education by himself. Of course not, he is a child. Anyway, so they violate the right of parents to educate their children according to their own faith, which applies to any religion. So, and it's a right protected by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and also the Convention of the Child. So the right of parents to educate their children in conformity with their own faith is completely violated by Japan, and Japan deems it is legitimate to replace the parents for their ideological religious choices towards the child. But this is really a serious concern regarding human rights, and it should be really considered by the UN here, because it's an enormous, there has been a new plan last year which has been adopted in this regard, and it has an extreme, it's a wide scope of application with millions of copies and cartoons distributed to the children at school, which infringe human rights. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you very much. I think what we have to take away here is it started out as by non-state actors, and it's a total complicity with the government of Japan, and it's really threatening basic human rights. So we don't want to. We have 1 more minute, so we have to. Unfortunately, we have to close here the meeting. We can't take any questions and answers, so sorry about that. But in respect for the next group of the next session, we have to close here. Thank you very much, and wishing you a good day. Session is closed. So.